When COVID hit, everyone thought the cruise industry was done. Well, not everyone, but many people thought they were toast.
Cruise lines have been hit hard, as you know. Bookings and earnings estimates are dropping right along with the stock.
The whole industry shut down for 15 months, and by September of 2022, the three major public cruise lines had accumulated $74 billion of debt. Even in good times, cruise ships are basically floating petri dishes. You have thousands of people packed into tight spaces. If just one person is sick, it's only a matter of time before someone else gets it. In the early days of COVID, there were no vaccines. The only way to stop the spread was quarantine. For cruise ships, this meant that if someone tested positive, the whole ship was treated as one massive biohazard. Many ports did not allow ships with sick passengers to dock. Ships became stranded, with the most famous case being the Diamond Princess, which was stuck at sea for a total of 27 days. All passengers were forced to quarantine in their cabin for at least 14 days. I mean, could you imagine? If you had an interior cabin, 162 square feet at most, and you literally could not leave, it would almost be, as they say, a floating prison.
Guests are confined to their rooms, with some describing it as a floating prison.
It was hard enough for passengers, but for crew, it was even worse. Even after passengers were offloaded, crew were stranded on ships for months, unable to disembark, many thousands of miles away from their families.
The U.S. Coast Guard says at least 54,000 crew members remain aboard 85 ships in U.S. waters. More than 100,000 crew members around the globe have been given no firm details on when they can disembark.
It was a total nightmare and a huge blow for an industry that was just beginning to hit its stride, growing at a rate of roughly 2 times the rate of air travel and 3 times GDP. Guys, compared to air travel, cruising was still absolutely peanuts. In 2019, roughly 30 million people cruised globally. By contrast, over 848 million people passed through US airports alone. Peter, what are you doing talking about cruise ships? I thought this was an aviation channel, and you're right. But when I took my first cruise just a few months ago, I realized airlines and cruise lines have a lot in common. They're both capital intensive, they both rely heavily on load factors to generate profits, and their biggest costs are often labor and fuel. They also rely on each other to survive. If you live in Iowa and want to go on a cruise, you're going to need to find a flight to get there. And might I remind you that Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, Carnival, they don't own airplanes. Although there are a number of companies that act as both airlines and cruise lines, but that's a topic for another day. Cruise lines help generate demand for airlines. Well over half of the world's 38 million cruisers arrive by air for their sailing. But it also works the other way around, where you're more likely to take a cruise if you know there's an affordable nonstop flight that can get you to your city of embarkation. This is called the air-cruise interdependency. Airlines and cruise lines are inherently intertwined, and passengers increasingly book their flight and cruise together, even going as far as to judge their cruise line based on the flight, when the two really had nothing to do with each other. It really is a fascinating case study on consumer behavior. But let's get back to the cruise industry and the massive debacle it faced in the depths of the pandemic. During COVID, you could still fly because, well, it was essential for the movement of people and goods, but the cruise industry shut down completely. The CDC banned cruising until November of 2020, and the CLIA, the Cruise Lines International Association, voluntarily suspended cruises until the end of the year. The stocks of major cruise lines, Royal, Carnival, and Norwegian, lost about 75% of their value.
But I want to say something that is very not journalistic to say, and that is this. I have real empathy for you. I feel sorry because you had a business that was thriving, and this puts you right in the center of it. Do you ever have a moment where you go, why me?
Royal was burning through more than $10 million of cash per day as it continued to keep its ships running, which essentially became floating hotels for crew members. In the United States, there were 0 revenue sailings until June of 2021, when the Celebrity Edge pulled away from Fort Lauderdale with 1,100 passengers, just 40% of her total capacity.
What's it like to be back?
This is our honeymoon. It's our delayed honeymoon. Life is good.
Vaccines were not mandated due to Florida law. but if you weren't vaccinated, you were subject to a whole bunch of restrictions by the cruise line, including constant testing. So it turns out all adult passengers on this cruise were fully vaccinated, and as such, there were basically zero restrictions once on board. No masks, no social distancing, no curfews. In fact, the only things that were slightly annoying were 1. The lack of a self-serve buffet, and 2. The limited number of shore excursions due to restrictions on land. Otherwise, passengers on the Celebrity Edge in June 2021 basically got 2 times the space at the same price or better than the pre-COVID sailing. Imagine that. No lines for food, no lines for pool chairs, no lines for the elevators. Elsewhere in the world, in the UK for example, there were even less people on the first post-COVID sailings. The MSC Virtuosa set sail from Southampton in May of 2021 with 1,000 passengers, just 16% of its total capacity. Restrictions on the Virtuosa were a little more burdensome with masks, GPS tracking, social distancing, and more, but still, cruising was sort of a cheat code, a way to escape the local lockdowns. Cruising was already a good value, but I'd argue that cruising in 2021 was one of the single best value vacations on Earth. For those of you who haven't cruised before, here's an idea of the sort of value you can get. A 7-night Caribbean cruise costs anywhere from $500 to $750 a person for a basic interior room. For this calculation, let's look at the MSC World America on September 13th, which looks like it will run us $539 per person. That fare includes the room, obviously, access to basically all the ship's pools and water slides, as well as unlimited food at the buffet and main dining room. However, there are a few add-ons that will be hard to escape without. For our purposes, we'll assume you pay gratuities of $10 per day, Wi-Fi for one device of $20 per day, and the drink package of around $80 per day. All told, we're looking at a little over $1,300 for one person for 7 nights, an average of $187 a night. Now, if you want to just grab a hotel room on the beach in South Florida, say maybe at the Margaritaville Hollywood Beach Resort, that will run you $322 per night, or $161 per person. Not too bad, actually. I'm surprised. But remember, that doesn't include any food or drink. If you grab just 2 margaritas at the 5 o'clock somewhere bar, that will run you $28. On the food front, there's no way you're surviving for less than $50 per day unless you're eating microwave meals or hoagies from Wawa, which, might I add, is way less satisfying than unlimited food from a cruise ship buffet anyways. So adding in our conservative food and drink assumption, that brings the land total to $240 per person, 23% more than the cruise. And that's not even factoring in the other built-in advantages of a cruise, like the ability to see multiple destinations without having to unpack your bags, which is hard to put a price on. Now, of course, cruising is not for everyone. If you're claustrophobic or you get seasick, I totally get that, and that can outweigh any embedded cost advantages you may enjoy versus a traditional hotel. But the point is, if you can stomach the crowds and the movement of the ship, cruising is pretty insane value. All the bad publicity and horror stories of people being trapped in their inside cabins for 2 weeks, that was forgotten almost immediately once the vaccines came out. As such, the industry bounced back in a huge way post-COVID, outpacing almost all other segments of the travel market. Consider this, in 2021, just 4.8 million passengers embarked on ocean-going cruises globally. 2 years later, that number had more than sextupled to 31.7 million. That represents 107% of pre-COVID levels, meaning 7% more people were cruising in 2023 than 2019. Compare that to international tourism numbers, which had rebounded, but not nearly as much. Come 2023, foreign arrivals into the US were still 12% below their 2019 levels. Land-based travel was still suffering. Hotel stays were down, restaurant foot traffic was down, and the single most important tourism stat, Disney attendance, was also down. Park attendance in 2023 came in at about 49 million across the 4 parks, 17% lower than in 2019. So what's the secret sauce? Why is cruising outpacing almost every other segment of the travel industry? Well, we already covered the value, but cruising is also becoming way more mainstream. The average age of cruisers is coming down. We're seeing more families, we're seeing more solo cruisers, and we're seeing more repeat cruisers. 20 years ago, cruising was still perceived as a vacation for older, wealthier people. It was a little bit stuffy. The average cruiser was 50 years old, and ships were designed for the more mature traveler. Think libraries, lounges, theaters, casinos, and maybe 1 or 2 pools maximum. Oh, plus shuffleboard. Cannot forget about shuffleboard. Dining options were pretty limited to the main dining room, the buffet, and maybe 1 or 2 specialty restaurants. Most cruise lines had some sort of nightly dress code for the main dining room, and on formal night, the whole place was flooded with tuxes and evening gowns. Do any of you guys even own tuxedos anymore? I personally do, but I know a lot of people who just rent because they use them so infrequently. Ships weren't floating cities. The average capacity was around 1,500 guests, and the Queen Mary II was still the largest cruise ship in the world by gross tonnage. The whole industry capacity was 250,000 berths, spread across around 290 cruise ships, an average of under 900 berths per ship. Now, don't get me wrong, the idea of a mega ship wasn't new. Carnival had its Conquest class, and Royal Caribbean had its Freedom class ships, which had up to 4,400 berths. But I'd argue the real mega floating resort city ship era began with Royal Caribbean's Oasis class, launched in 2009. The Oasis of the Seas is around 225,000 gross tons, 50% larger than her Freedom class predecessors. She has 6,300 berths, 20 restaurants, a dozen entertainment venues, 4 pools, 10 hot tubs, an ice skating rink, 2 surf simulators, a zip line, and a carousel. She cost $1.4 billion to build, and if anyone cares, she's 5 times the size of the Titanic. Spending that much money on a single ship is a big bet, but once it's in service, it can be a profit-generating machine. Analysts estimate that Oasis-class ships can generate anywhere between $250 to $300 million in EBITDA per year, meaning that the ship will basically pay for itself in 5 to 6 years. The bigger the ship, the more passengers it can carry, the more activities and attractions it has, the more money it can make. Royal estimates that their newest, largest ships generate a premium of $10 to $20 per passenger per day compared to their legacy ships. But Peter, doesn't profitability come at the expense of the passenger experience? For some industries, yes, especially when the profits come from cost cutting. But in the cruise industry, it seems to be quite the opposite. They like to juice their profits from the revenue side of the equation, but they don't make everyone pay for it if they don't want it. But turns out most people pay for it without batting an eye, because they only get to take 1 or 2 big vacations a year, and the cruise is the destination. It's their hotel, their restaurant, their bar, and their entertainment. So the drink packages and specialty dining packages have been flying off the shelves. Shore excursions are another major margin driver, with cruise lines pocketing up to half the ticket price without incurring any real labor or equipment costs. The real ace card of the cruise industry, though, is the private island, or private destination to be technically correct. A place that's curated for maximum vacationability. It's easy, accessible, and most importantly, safe. No one's gonna be bugging you to braid your hair. No one's gonna try to sell you baskets or knock off purses. No getting lost in a foreign country. There's plenty of signage, staff at almost every corner to help you find your way, and a tram service, at least on Coco Key if you get tired of walking. And best of all, a lot of it is completely free, or at least not any incremental cost to what you paid for the cruise. The buffet on the island is included in your cruise fare, and if you bought the unlimited drinks package, it works at the bars on the island, at least on the cruises I've been on. Now, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of opportunities to empty your pockets on premium experiences. If you want a cabana at Cocoa Beach Club, that could run you up to $3,000 per day, potentially more expensive than the entire cruise fare itself. But there are also more affordable activities. For example, the kayak tour, a 2-hour adventure for $50. So regardless of your budget, you're probably going to enjoy your experience on Coco Key, Great Stirrup Key, Ocean Key, Celebration Key, or any of the other exclusive destinations. Now, I realize at this point it probably sounds like I was bought and paid for by the cruise industry. You're probably like, this guy is broken. He'd do anything to get back on a cruise ship. And you're not 100% wrong. I am actively looking for my next weekend getaway from Port Canaveral, just because it's so dang convenient to where I am in Orlando. But it's the business model of cruising that really gets me going. And I can learn a lot of that from right here in the comfort of my own home. As someone who's used to the airline industry with their razor-thin margins, it was mind-boggling to see just how profitable the cruise business is, even despite the ridiculous costs of acquiring and operating these huge ships. I mean, not only did the Oasis-class ships cost over $1 billion to build, equal to 4 or 5 wide-body airplanes, but they also cost over $1 million per day just to operate. Nonetheless, cruise lines can more than cover these costs. The big 3 cruise lines, Royal, Norwegian, and Carnival, averaged 18% operating margins in 2024, whereas the big 3 airlines, United, American, and Delta, averaged just under 8%. There are a litany of reasons why, more than I can cover in just this video, but in a nutshell, demand is very strong and capacity is limited, meaning they have a ton of pricing power. They offer a broader and more diverse array of products and experiences than airlines, many of which they can charge extra for, boosting their margins. And on the cost side, cruise lines benefit from very cheap labor, at least relative to the airlines. Now, of course, travel is cyclical, so there will be less people cruising when the economy slows. But I'd argue it's one of the most resilient forms of travel out there. Even with the pandemic, cruising has grown at an average rate of 6.5% a year since 1990. They plowed right through the crises that have crippled other segments of travel: 9/11, the global financial crisis, and regional conflicts in certain parts of the world. Now, even though flying will always be more fun for me personally, I think cruising can be such a dynamic and fun vacation for so many people. Honestly, seeing other people happy makes me happy, so for that reason alone, I'll probably be booking another cruise soon. Would you guys like to see more cruise content, or should we stick to our core competency of airlines and aviation? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for coming along with me today, and I wish you the safest and happiest of travels wherever your journeys may take you. So long.